Another week, another painfully close and brutal loss for Texas A&M. 3 games this year that you feel like Texas A&M probably should have won. Put themselves into position to win. Were competitive to the bitter end and once again came up short. What is it with these close competitive games that A&M just can't get over the hump in? My head is spinning with the results of this season, man. I mean, you want to blame the coach, you want to blame injuries, you want to blame players underperforming. I don't know what it is. It's a combination of a lot of things. So, in this video, I'm going to try to do my best and try to put it all into perspective, try to put it all into context, talk about Jimbo Fisher, talk about this latest game, which I did rewatch, and just see where we're at. I don't know, man. It sucks making these videos after these brutal losses time and time again. It's so fun to do this after a win. But after these brutal losses and just coming up just a little bit short so consistently, it really freaking wears on you. And that's not just me as the speaker. It's us as a fan base. It wears on us. And as a result, you got a lot of pissed off Aggies right now. A lot of Aggies pointing fingers, griping at each other, cussing at each other. I mean, I've seen some brutal stuff on X, Twitter these days, after games, throughout the week, in the comments of these videos. Understandably so. So let's just talk about the program. I want you guys to comment, to vent in detail, more so than just the words fire Jimbo Fisher. We understand that. We understand that's at the forefront right now. But what all is wrong with this team? And you can't just say Jimbo Fisher. I know some of you will. I know some of you will be funny and just type the words Jimbo Fisher. But I want details here because to come up so short time and time again, and if it's not one thing, it's another. We've been griping about this offense all year. And they just put together the best 3 quarters I've seen them play in I don't know how long. And then the defense is the one that ended up coming up short versus Ole Miss. So let's talk about that game, talk about the program, talk about good old Jimbo. And we'll call it a Monday night or a Tuesday, whenever you're watching this. So guys, like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Let's get right into it. All right, so I want to start with something that I kind of realized after rewatching some of these games and thinking about this team and its construction. I know when I say these words, it's going to be jarring to a lot of y'all, but hear me out and tell me if and why I'm wrong. I don't think this team is as talent stacked as many think it is. And I'm not saying as Aggies think. I'm saying as the national landscape, as the world sees Texas A&M, I don't think this team is actually as talented as everyone thinks. Oftentimes, Texas A&M is expected to emulate what Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama does because of their recruiting rankings in recent years. And yes, A&M has ranked highly in recruiting, especially in 2022, but the team we're looking at right now, it's not as diverse in talent and fleshed out in talent in all positions like those other top programs that I just mentioned. When your quarterback goes down at Alabama, you have a Tua or a Jalen Hurts or whatever blue chip quarterback waiting in the woodworks to come play. You don't have that at A&M. When an Evan Stewart goes down, you don't have a 5-star wide receiver going into the game. This team is very, very talented at defensive line. The 2022 class, I mean, if you take out a lot of those defensive line 5 stars and 4 stars, it's not quite as powerful a class as its rating indicated. It's still a really good freaking class. That was a legendary recruiting class. But that's one position group that heavily outweighed the rest within that class. It was also a really good cornerback class. None of those guys are enrolled at the school anymore. And versus Ole Miss, that definitely paid dividends. You were down Tyreek Chappelle. You lost Sam McCall, your transfer corner, late in the game. You were down to a true freshman and a nickel playing outside. And in that Ole Miss game, in my opinion, the story of that game, the reason A&M lost that game was because their receivers absolutely had a heyday outside versus those inexperienced corners, or DeBerry, who is just not a corner. So that is one glaring talent hole on this team. So when you say A&M has all the talent in the world, we really don't. Not everywhere. Max Johnson showed so much heart versus Ole Miss. So much heart. He played such a great game in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, he's just an imperfect player right now in his career. I think he has a lot of raw tools. I think he has a lot of potential. I mean, he's going to have a couple more years of eligibility left. Who knows what he's going to do? But I think it's pretty clear that Connor Wigman was the guy for a reason. And I don't think Max Johnson is just some trash can. But I don't think he was that turnkey starter, don't skip a beat guy that we thought he was. He's not this 5-star stud you have waiting on the bench like you do at some of these other programs that I mentioned. Evan Stewart, you miss him. When he misses a game, you really miss him. You have some other really good receivers. They're there anyway in Anais, who's an absolute stud, and an Aggie legend, even though he hasn't won at the highest level. No championships, no SEC championships. But just as such a consistent, calming force for the team, always there when you need him. And yeah, he won a New Year's Six game, so Anais is an Aggie legend. But you don't have that game changer coming in after Evan. Ja'Day Walker's also really freaking good. I hope he plays a lot for this team going forward. I love his heart. I love his willingness to block and get dirty out there. I love Ja'Day Walker. That guy, you go to war with that guy 10 times out of 10. But the O-line. I mean, Bryce Foster, yes, highly rated. He's coming off an ACL, and he's definitely underperformed this year. Having said that, we just saw the O-line have their best 3 quarters of ball in the last I don't know how long. But you're still limited at O-line this year. You just are. And I know a lot of people blame coaching, but I see a lot of Chase Basantis just getting pushed around because he's a freshman out there. You're starting a freshman at the offensive line. That tells me that there's a talent deficiency there. Those great programs typically don't start a freshman at tackle. And if they do, you're talking about the best of the best coming out of high school. So yeah, I don't think this is like that. It's a talented team. Don't get me wrong. But this team obviously has personnel holes. And I don't think that our expectations were accurately gauged relative to what the team actually is. But we're finding that out as we go on, obviously. I think we were still right to assume. But we're finding out more and more that this team just doesn't have that high-end experienced talent that some of those other programs do. Which is unfortunate. And I think that's shown in pretty much every loss. Specifically on the O-line, but definitely at corner. Those 2 areas. 2 big holes in the personnel, within the personnel groups on this team. Layden Robinson is probably the weak link of the O-line this year. That's just an unfortunate reality. After showing so much promise young, I've seen more blunders and whiffs from him than anybody else in that group. That's definitely an indictment against Adazio. I can't defend Steve Adazio. I really can't, after seeing the regression of some of those guys that you did have a lot of hope for going into this year and last year. That's a pretty brutal look for Adazio, man. I'm not the kind of guy that's going to come on here and say fire a coach, but I'm not going to defend him, you know? It's not something that I can do. They did play their best game of the year versus Ole Miss. And I know we don't like to say it, but I think the transfer portal last year, the mass exodus that everyone was predicting after going 5-7, it wasn't a mass exodus across the board, but it really, really hurt that corner group. Denver Harris, Groves Killebrew, Smoke Bowie, just to name a few of the corners that would be mainstays on the team this year, left the program last year after going 5-7. I don't know that many of those guys are very successful to wherever they've moved from. I know for sure some of them aren't. But if those guys work out at A&M, those are guys you desperately needed in a game like this versus Ole Miss, where Trey Harris, number 9, looked like Calvin Johnson against you and absolutely changed the game. I figured that we would get something similar to what we actually got from Quinshaw Judkins versus Ole Miss, and I knew their receivers were pretty good, but I didn't expect them just to pick on the young corners over and over and over again. And to me, that was the difference in the game. So yeah, A&M's just deficient in certain areas, and that really hurts. And I don't know if you blame coaching or you blame, yeah, I guess you do. Team's not as talented as we thought, or as I thought at least. I'm speaking for myself only. But I looked at this team, I measured this team against the greats out there, expecting that we would hit that this year, and that is obviously just not the case, which sucks. So there's a little perspective there. We ain't all that with the roster. Now, there are some really promising pieces out there, a lot of promising young pieces, but a lot of the guys that you really need aren't there right now. That and injuries just freaking suck, man. I mean, you have Tyreek Chappelle. He's your most proven corner. He's gone. You felt that. Obviously, on the other side of the ball, Connor Wigman, Evan Stewart, Ruben Fothery. You really missed those guys. Oh, and going back to defense, you never had a chance with Tony Grimes coming from North Carolina since he's been injured all year. Talking about new position coaches, I think strength and conditioning, that might be something to look at. I mean, the amount of injuries that have been stacked up on this A&M program for the last few years has just been absolutely astronomical. It's been crazy. The last clean quarterback year was Kellen Mond, and that was the best year A&M's had in the last, I don't know how many years, 11 years. Injuries, roster deficiencies, and then coaching. I mean, what can you say? You keep coming up short in these games. Having said everything I said about the roster and injuries, you're in every single one of these games, and you still find ways to come up short. You find ways to lose rather than to win. It seems like you make the biggest blunder each game rather than making the big game-winning plays each game. The other teams do that. A&M makes the big blunders in the games. Is that youth? Is that talent deficiency? Is that coaching? I'm picking D, all the above, and then I'm sending that Scantron in. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to coaching. I have never been the kind of fan for any of the sports that I follow or for A&M to call for a head coach to be fired as my solution to winning. Unless you've lost the locker room, unless players are actively losing interest and looking disconnected from the program. I don't see that with this team, but what I do see is disappointing losses stacking up. So I am having trouble wrapping my head around where to place the blame or who to place the blame onto. And I think the easiest answer is just Jimbo, right? Like that has to be where your mind goes. If there's so many issues coming together, it has to go to the head man. If you look at the program from 1,000 yards away, you have to look at who's in charge. So yeah, a huge majority of this is on the head man. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, he's not going anywhere. I do not believe that he will be fired at the end of this year unless you lose to Mississippi State and your bowl game. But if you win Mississippi State and you win your bowl game, I am 95% sure he'll be back next year. I don't know how to feel about that. I'm still processing that. I know all of you guys are probably screaming at your screens right now because I know the consensus is fire him now. But here's my thing. There's no guarantee that if you fire him, anything's getting fixed. I know you rip the Band-Aid of what you think is a toxic culture or just a culture of not winning. I get that. But I don't know that there's a guy available that comes to A&M and just fixes it. So because of that, I'm not super quick to want to pull the trigger. Although I'm not going to complain if it does happen. It's just so hard. It's just hard, man. It's hard. You're looking at a confused Aggie right here, guys. Because next year, in my mind, was always the year where... I just said next year, and I hate it. Next year is the year, in my mind, that I thought A&M's window realistically opened. I thought 10-2 was the ceiling this year. I thought with superstar quarterback play that I thought we were going to get, A&M was going to go 10-2 this year. You don't get it. It turns out Max isn't the stud plug-and-play quarterback that we thought and hoped he was. Tons of missed reads from Max, as heroic a performance as he had versus Ole Miss. But throughout the year, tons of missed reads, inability to feel pressure, bad O-line play combined with that makes him look even worse. And you're just not getting that higher-end offensive play that I think you probably could have gotten with Connor. And unfortunately, to most of us, that's an excuse for A&M, for Jimbo Fisher. It just is. He didn't have his quarterback this year, so you didn't get a fair look at it. But then again, you're in a position to win all of these games. So guys, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this situation. I cannot definitively say that firing Jimbo fixes A&M's problems, because I think the problems go deeper than just the head coach. I think it's also personnel and injury. It's tough for me to say all this because I know how it'll be judged. I know every time I put a video out, especially in times like this, I know how hard that you can be judged for having opinions. So it's tough for me to come out and say that I don't think he should be fired this year. I know a lot of you will disagree, and I have to accept that when I press post on this video. I just don't see a magic fix through firing him. And I think he needs to suffer through a bad year if he's going to tank this thing. I think if next year's bad, I think Jimbo Fisher needs to suffer through it rather than just get his buyout and run before the worst of it comes. I mean, shit, we've waited since 1939. We've averaged 7.5 wins for the last 30 years. What the hell is one more year? Let this guy go and figure his shit out with this team at least. I mean, if it goes down the toilet, so will his reputation, if it hasn't already. Let him suffer through that if it's going to go down like that. I know it sucks for us, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know, guys. Really tough scenario us Aggies find ourselves in. I know a lot of y'all think the solution is just simply get a new coach in there, and maybe that fixes it, but you're looking at another 5 to 6 year process. You're looking at another long-term thing because there's not a turnkey coach out there right now, at least from what we can tell right now. Obviously, anybody has a chance to have that kind of a year, but you're talking about maximum exodus of players if you lose a coach, total culture reset, and maybe that's what A&M needs. I'm going to support this program and this team no matter what. I'm going to try to stay as positive as I possibly can because I don't want this aura of gross negativity circling the program from the fan base. I love this team. I love these players. And I love my Aggies, man. So give me your thoughts. Tell me why you disagree with me. I understand that most of y'all will. And I will see you very soon with my Mississippi State preview video. I know these times suck, guys. We'll get through it. Gig 'em.